Shoot presents.
When you mention retro football games today, two games invariably come up: Kick-Off and Sensible Soccer. From the late 80s into the early to mid 90s, these two franchises dominated the footy game scene and looked unstoppable. Little did we know that their approach to footy, the fast-paced top-down arcade style, was going to be just a short but influential sidestep in the history of football gaming. EA Sports broke into the market with their original isometric 2D game, FIFA International Soccer. This prompted other franchises to add isometric views like Anchor did with Player Manager 2 and Chrysalis did with Man United The Double. However, the 2D era was about to come to a fairly abrupt halt with the first fully 3D football game for home computers or consoles, Actua Soccer.
Welcome to the match between Sweden and Brazil. Well, they've obviously worked hard on the pitch. It looks really good.
FIFA 96 was released more or less at the same time, boasting a virtual stadium environment, and although it looked amazing, it still used 2D sprites for the players. Sega released the first Virtua Striker around this time, which was fully 3D, but it was arcade only. I remember the impact it had on me the first time I played it in an arcade. At least Actua Soccer was the first 3D game that was actually playable. Green Suda's Vector Soccer had made the attempt already in 1991, but failed so miserably it doesn't really count. Actua Soccer's development was planned in early 1994 and estimated to 18 weeks according to an early document uncovered by the Gremlin archives. The same document reveals that the game was originally Actua Football. It was produced by Tony Casson, the producer of Premier Manager.
My job as producer is basically keeping all the programmers, graphic artists, musicians, commentary programmers all in the same direction.
And there were plenty of people who worked on Premier Manager that were involved in Actua Soccer, like Phil Rankin and Terry Spencer, and of course legendary Gremlin musician Neil Biggin.
I'm Neil, and I'm a musician. I write most of the music for this company, do a few sound effects.
It was a very ambitious project that the team took on with great pride if the previews are to be believed. The press were impressed with the 3D graphics, and especially with the state-of-the-art motion capture technique used.
To give a more realistic feel to their games, Gremlin have an in-house motion capture studio, whereby using infrared cameras they can digitize any movement. This is particularly useful in their Actua Sports series, as it gives lifelike movement to the players.
Gremlin reportedly paid £250,000 for the equipment. Gremlin used Sheffield Wednesday players Andy Sint and Graham Hyde, and Wednesday and England keeper Chris Woods for the motion capture.
And for me to actually appear in it, or not appear in it, but the movements appear there, it's like I say, it's a dream come true.
The team's diligent work bore fruit, as the press also loved the finished product. Both computer and video games and PC Zone hailed the game as a FIFA beater, and Gremlin's promo campaign played into the great reviews and the FIFA rivalry. So what's the game like then? It's a fast-paced arcade-style footy game that controls pretty well for a first outing. The polygon players look good, although the motion capture animation is somewhat stiff. The game has a selection of the 44 top-ranked national teams at the time. This means it includes a superb Sweden team that just won a bronze at the '94 World Cup. You can customize the teams, some things surrounding the game, and you can make the referee blind. The criticism the game received revolved mostly around the lack of club teams. To rectify this, Gremlin released Actua Soccer Club Edition that added the English Premier League teams. Except for the Premier League teams, the game was pretty much identical to the first version. A further version was released as an official Euro 96 tie-in, UEFA Euro 96 England, using the Actua Soccer engine. This game had different presentation, using its official Euro 96 license. This was your chance to make Southgate take penalties over and over until you got it right. There was also an arcade version of Actua Soccer and tournaments held. With versions of the first game taking Gremlin well into 1996, it would be almost another full year until Actua Soccer 2 was released. Actua Soccer 2 hit the market in late 1997, facing stiff competition from FIFA 98, one of the best outings of FIFA ever. Electronic Arts had stepped up their game in terms of both gameplay and presentation in the 2 years since Actua Soccer was released. Actua Soccer 2 still stood its ground compared to FIFA, with updated mocap animations and overhauled graphics. The snow effect blew me away. Gremlin also tried to keep pace with Electronic Arts in terms of presentation, although Actua Soccer 2 is not as polished graphically as FIFA 98. The games also play differently, with FIFA 98 taking a slower, more simulation-oriented approach, while Actua Soccer 2 is still fast-paced arcade action. The boxes told the story. FIFA was the large footballing brain of David Beckham, while Actua was the explosive finishing power of Shearer. All in all, I think Actua 2 held up pretty well in comparison. It did its own thing really well.
Well, his control is superb. I mean, a lot is to do with his balance. I mean, he seems so light on his feet, and it enables him really just to cushion the ball instantly. And as it say, he's got a yard or two of time and space in the penalty area that you just wonder where he is getting that time and space. And that's what makes him so exceptional, really.
Where the game lacked was again in content. The game came with national squads like the first game, and in some versions with a fully licensed Italian Serie A. It did come with a nice editing facility that I loved playing around with. It had custom low polygon heads to use, with recognizable likenesses of players like Cantona, Giggs, Gullit, Higuita, Valderrama, and of course a Gremlin. Actua Soccer 2 was not released in other editions or under any licenses. It was however bundled with Voodoo 2 cards, which is how I got my first copy of Actua Soccer 2. The second installment got wildly different receptions in the press, with the Extremes PC Zone giving it 90% and still hailing it as a FIFA beater, while Computer and Video Games, reviewing the North American release called Fox Sports Soccer 99, called it way off the mark and gave it runner-up in the yearly Coaster Awards, only second to the famously hopeless Trespasser. Meanwhile, Gremlins Actua Sports series was taking flight with a host of new games and sports incorporated, like hockey, golf, tennis, and even pool. Actua Soccer 3 only took a year to complete. It arrived in late 1998 or early 1999. Even though the development cycle was shorter, Gremlin really stepped up their game with Actua Soccer 3. The previews talk about 450 teams, including both clubs and nations, thousands of players, revamped motion capture with 10,000 frames of animation and 30% more polygons for the players. The preview screenshots looked very good, and it looked like Gremlin would keep up with Electronic Arts for another year and provide worthy competition for FIFA. By the time the game came out, expectations were very high, but the game managed to meet most of them. Actua Soccer 3 definitely won the intro competition with what is arguably the best intro to a football game ever. Once we get done gaping at the intro, we find familiar looking options in the menus, but the content now is much larger. There are now 25 leagues in the game, and the 450 teams make for over 10,000 players. What before was the main criticism of the game was now one of its strengths. The unique heads looked better and was now made up of hair plus head instead of one-form heads, allowing for bigger variation. As far as I can tell, there is no way to actually see the heads in the editor though, and there are only 7 unique heads you can actually use in the editor. A plus here is there are a good selection of default heads and parts to use, although a drawback is that you have to select them by text. There are even female heads included. In addition to the 450 default teams, there are cheat codes that can unlock plenty more teams. All-star teams from a lot of different clubs, like the Busby Babes or a vintage Chelsea team, along with the usual selection of silly teams and developer squads. On the field, there's a marked difference from earlier games. Some of the arcade style has given way to a slower and more sophisticated game. Passes are far easier to string together, and there is more build-up play compared to the two predecessors' boot and run approach. Similarly, the AI opposition also builds up their attacks this time around. Coupled with the new speed settings and the different difficulty levels, this plays more like football than ever before. There is an option to turn off sticky ball and make it more like kick-off or sensi, but I'm too old for that stuff. I take the easy route. The drawbacks are the flip side of the same coin. Sometimes the new controls and the extra buttons, this uses 8 instead of the previous 4, makes controls less intuitive, and at times they feel a little sluggish compared to the fast pace of the predecessors. All in all, this was and is my favorite of the three. It was well received by the press and still considered a worthy challenger to FIFA, although even PC Zone admitted for the first time Actua fallen just behind the unstoppable juggernaut FIFA was becoming. Still, it was a promising step forward, and I couldn't wait for Actua Soccer 4. But then, many of you will already know what happened. Infogrames bought Gremlin Interactive, and the Sheffield studio only lasted a few more years until it was closed in 2003. Much of the talent that created Actua Soccer and Premier Manager had already left by then. Casson and Biggin went to rival Electronic Arts, and Rankin, lead programmer for both Actua Soccer 2 and 3, worked for Sega and then reconvened with Casson at Sumo Digital. While still in operation, the studio did release another footy game, UEFA Challenge, in 2001. Evidence points to this game being remnants of what was supposed to be Actua Soccer 4, as the executable is named Soccer 4 in the same vein as the Actua Soccer 3 executable that was named Soccer 3. However, with a new producer and a designer who, according to Moby Games, never worked on a footy game before, the result did not measure up to the legacy of Actua Soccer. The Zone calls it UEFA Challenged and notes that it's not exactly Actua Soccer 4 while giving it a disheartening 54%. That marked an unfortunate end for Actua Soccer series. This also marks the end of my video on Actua Soccer. If the subject of Gremlin interactive footy games is of more interest to you, you can find my video on Premier Manager on the channel. I am, however, not sure I'm completely done with the subject as a whole. Original Gremlin founder Ian Stewart has acquired the rights to all the old Gremlin games, and Mr. Stewart was on the Retro Hour podcast not long ago, and he had this to say.
You know, the other one that's closest to my heartbeat is Premier Manager. That's just, you know, that still sells today. You know, it's on PlayStation Store, and I get a little royalty check every month, which I'm very happy for. And so you never know, you might see another Premier Manager game coming along sometime.
So who knows, maybe I'll have reason to revisit the subject very soon. Until next time.